Sarah Thompson kept her head down as she wiped the conference table in Maxwell Investments' top floor. The late-night executive meeting was still ongoing, with wealthy investors laughing and drinking expensive wine. At 58, she had learned to make herself invisible while cleaning around Boston's elite. Oh my goodness. A sharp voice cut through the room as red wine splashed across the table. "You stupid cleaning lady. Look what you made me do." Sarah hadn't been anywhere near the woman who knocked over her own glass, but she knew better than to argue. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. I'll clean it right away." "These shoes cost more than you make in a month," the executive woman sneered, dabbing her designer heels with a napkin. Other guests snickered, whispering behind manicured hands. "Look at her," someone muttered, "probably dreaming about being one of us." "I heard she's been cleaning here forever," another added. "Some people just don't have the ambition to better themselves." Sarah's cheeks burned as she quickly wiped up the spill, her hands trembling slightly. After 30 years of cleaning offices, she had developed a thick skin, but some nights were harder than others. She hurried to the employee bathroom, locked herself in a stall, and finally let her tears fall. As she wiped her eyes, Sarah's hand brushed against the letter in her pocket, the eviction notice she'd received that morning. After 3 decades in her small apartment on Cedar Street, the building was being converted into luxury condos. She had 30 days to leave the place where she'd raised her daughter Amy, where she'd nursed her husband through his final days, where she'd built a life of quiet determination. The memory of her father's voice suddenly filled her mind. Michael O'Brien had arrived in America in 1960 with $10 in his pocket and a dream in his heart. "Remember Sarah, girl," he'd say in his thick Irish accent. "In America, even the impossible dreams can come true. But you have to be smart about money. It's not just about making it, it's about growing it." Every Sunday, he would sit with young Sarah at their tiny kitchen table, showing her how to budget his factory worker's salary, explaining the miracle of compound interest using pennies from his jar. "Watch this, love," he'd say, adding 1 penny to another. "Money makes money, but only if you're patient and wise." Sarah smiled, touching the letter again. If only they knew. Her day had started at 4 a.m. as it had for the past decade. While the city slept, she studied financial reports, investment strategies, and market trends. Her small kitchen table was covered with highlighters and notebooks, financial newspapers, and printouts from the library's computers. She'd learned to make 1 cup of coffee last 2 hours, savoring each sip while analyzing stock patterns and market forecasts. From 6 a.m. to 2 p.m., she cleaned offices, paying special attention to the investment firm's conference rooms, where documents were often carelessly left behind. Between 3 and 5 p.m., she could be found in the back corner of the public library, poring over financial books and journals. And in the evenings, she taught free financial literacy classes to other cleaning ladies and service workers, sharing her father's wisdom about the power of patient investing. Even her uniform had been carefully chosen, plain and forgettable, helping her blend into the background while she absorbed every bit of financial knowledge she could gather. Her real treasures were hidden in a worn notebook, filled with careful observations and investment strategies that had slowly, steadily grown her secret fortune. The luxury watch on the bathroom wall showed 9:45 p.m. Sarah straightened her uniform, fixed her gray-streaked hair, and walked back to the conference room with renewed dignity. She still had work to do. As she gathered empty glasses and wiped down surfaces around the remaining executives, her eyes caught something on the table. A confidential document about an upcoming billion-dollar merger. Most cleaning staff wouldn't have understood its significance, but Sarah's heart raced as she quickly scanned the details. "This could be the opportunity of a lifetime," she whispered to herself, her mind already calculating potential market impacts. She pulled out her worn notebook, carefully hidden in her cleaning cart, and began taking notes. "What do you think you're doing?" Sarah's head snapped up. James Maxwell, the billionaire owner of Maxwell Investments, stood in the doorway, his penetrating gaze fixed on her and the confidential document beneath her hands. At 62, he had a commanding presence that filled the room, his silver hair and tailored suit reflecting his success. Sarah's fingers trembled on her notebook, but she straightened her back, channeling her father's courage when he'd first stepped onto American soil. Whatever happened next would change everything. She just didn't know if it would be for better or worse. James Maxwell took a step into the conference room, his expression unreadable. "I asked you a question. What are you doing with that document?" Sarah's mind raced. After years of staying invisible, she had finally been caught, but something in her refused to cower. "Mr. Maxwell, I apologize for overstepping, but I noticed an inconsistency in the merger proposal." His eyebrows rose. "Really? Do tell." Taking a deep breath, Sarah pointed to the financial projections. "The revenue forecasts don't account for the seasonal fluctuations in the target company's market. Based on their previous quarterly reports, their Q4 earnings are consistently overvalued by 15 to 20%. James walked closer, studying her face. "How does a cleaning lady know about quarterly earnings reports?" "I study, sir, every day before work." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "And I believe this merger might not be as profitable as your team projects." Instead of anger, curiosity flickered across James's face. He pulled up a chair. "Show me." For the next 20 minutes, Sarah explained her analysis, pointing out patterns she'd observed in similar mergers. James listened intently, occasionally asking sharp questions that she answered with growing confidence. Finally, he sat back. "Remarkable. Where did you learn all this?" The question triggered a painful memory. Sarah was suddenly back in her living room 10 years ago, the day after her husband Tom's funeral. She'd been going through his papers when she found them: credit card statements, loan documents, gambling debts. Their savings were gone. The college fund for their daughter Amy wiped out. "I had to learn," Sarah answered quietly. "After my husband died, I discovered we were broke. I promised myself I'd never be financially vulnerable again." She didn't mention the nights she'd spent crying at their kitchen table, terrified of losing their home, or how she'd started with just $50 a month in investments, learning from every mistake, growing her knowledge along with her small portfolio. "The library became my university," she continued. "I read everything I could find about investing, made small trades, learned from wins and losses. Now I teach others what I've learned." James studied her for a moment. "There's a party this Saturday on my yacht. Many of Boston's top investors will be there." He pulled out an invitation from his jacket. "I'd like you to come." Sarah stared at the golden envelope. "Sir, I'm just a cleaning lady." "No," James shook his head. "You're much more than that. Will you come?" Before Sarah could answer, voices echoed from the hallway. The cleaning supervisor and other staff members appeared, stopping short at seeing Sarah with James. "Is everything okay, Mr. Maxwell?" the supervisor asked, shooting Sarah a suspicious look. "Everything's fine. Sarah was just helping me with something." He turned back to her. "Think about it. Saturday at 7. After he left, the other cleaners surrounded Sarah. "What was that about?" her friend Rita asked. "Nothing important," Sarah said, tucking the invitation away. But she could feel their stares, the sudden distance growing between them. At her locker later, Sarah overheard whispers. "Who does she think she is? Trying to move up in the world. Better watch out for that one." Sarah's hands shook as she changed out of her uniform. In one evening, her carefully constructed invisible life had begun to crack. Driving home in her old car, she thought about another painful memory. The day she'd started her first job after Tom's death. Amy was 16 then, watching her mother leave for work in a cleaner's uniform. "Mom, you don't have to do this," Amy had said. "We can sell the house, move somewhere cheaper." "No, honey," Sarah had replied, hugging her daughter. "This job will help us keep our home. But more importantly, it'll teach me about the world of money. Sometimes you have to go down before you can rise up." Now, parking outside her soon-to-be-lost apartment building, Sarah pulled out the yacht party invitation. A cleaning lady at a billionaire's party. It sounded like a setup for humiliation. But then she remembered something else her father used to say. "Opportunities don't come dressed the way we expect, Sarah girl. Sometimes they come looking like our biggest fears." She looked up at her apartment window, where a single light burned. Tomorrow morning, she'd be up at 4 a.m. again, studying market trends before work. But maybe, just maybe, it was time to step out of the shadows. Little did she know, on the other side of Boston, Eleanor Whitmore was already making calls, asking questions about the cleaning lady who had caught James Maxwell's attention. Sarah walked through the bustling halls of Boston Medical School, searching for her daughter. She found Amy in the student lounge, slumped over textbooks, still wearing her hospital scrubs from her overnight rotation. "Mom," Amy blinked, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Sarah set down a bag of groceries. "Thought you might need real food instead of vending machine dinners." As Amy devoured the homemade sandwich, Sarah noticed the dark circles under her eyes and the stack of bills peeking out from her backpack. "How are you holding up, honey?" "I'm fine," Amy said automatically, then paused. "Actually, no, I'm not fine, Mom." She pulled out a letter from her coat pocket. "The tuition is going up again. My student loans are already maxed out, and the hospital's resident program might face budget cuts." Sarah's heart tightened. "What are you saying?" "I'm thinking about dropping out." Amy's voice cracked. "Maybe take a year off, work full-time, save up some money." "No." Sarah reached for her daughter's hand. "You're too close to finishing. We'll figure something out." "Like what, Mom?" "More cleaning jobs. You already work yourself to exhaustion." Amy's eyes filled with tears. "I see you getting older, still cleaning other people's messes. I can't let you sacrifice everything for me." Sarah wanted desperately to tell her daughter the truth about her investments, her secret wealth, but fear held her back. What if something went wrong? What if she lost it all like Tom had? The memory of her husband's last days flooded back. Tom in the hospital, delirious from pain medication, confessing about the gambling, the lies, the lost money. "I'm sorry," he'd kept saying. "I thought I could win it all back." "Mom," Amy's voice brought her back. "You went away for a moment there." "Just remembering your father," Sarah said softly. "He wanted so much for you to become a doctor." "I know." Amy wiped her eyes. "I remember him taking me to his construction sites, showing me his first aid kit. One day you'll have fancier tools than these, kiddo." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand. "Give me a little more time. Promise me you won't make any decisions about school for at least a month." After leaving the medical school, Sarah drove to the public library. Her evening class was smaller than usual. Many of her regular students had stopped coming since the closure notice went up. "They're turning it into a tech center," Mrs. Chen, the elderly librarian, explained. 30 years I've worked here, and now they say books are obsolete." Sarah looked around the room at her remaining students. A young waitress, 2 hotel maids, a janitor. All of them had dreams bigger than their current circumstances. All of them reminded her of herself 10 years ago. "Today we're going to talk about long-term investment strategies," she began, but her voice faltered as she noticed someone watching through the window, a well-dressed woman who looked strangely familiar. The woman quickly walked away, but Sarah felt uneasy. Later, gathering her teaching materials, she overheard Mrs. Chen talking on the phone. "Yes, she teaches financial classes here, for about 10 years now." "No, I don't know much about her background. Who did you say you were again?" Sarah hurried out to her car, her mind racing. Someone was asking questions about her, but why? At home, she went straight to her small office, really just a corner of her bedroom, and checked her investment accounts. Everything looked secure. Then she pulled out her father's old Bible, where she kept her most important documents. "Trust in God," her father always said, "but keep your records straight." Opening the Bible, Sarah found the photograph she was looking for, her father standing proudly in front of his first American factory job. His words echoed in her mind. "It's not where you start that matters, love. It's where you're heading." Sarah touched the yacht party invitation on her desk. In 3 days, she would step into a world she'd only observed from the sidelines. She said a quiet prayer, just as her father had taught her. But outside her building, in a parked luxury car, Eleanor Whitmore was making another phone call. "Yes, I need everything you can find on Sarah Thompson. Something about her doesn't add up, and I intend to find out what it is." Saturday evening found Sarah standing in front of her bedroom mirror, smoothing down the navy blue dress she'd bought from the local thrift store. The price tag had read $25, marked down from $30, and she'd felt a small victory in negotiating it down to $20. "Mom, you look beautiful," Amy said, putting final touches on Sarah's makeup. "But are you sure about this party?" These people, they're not exactly known for their kindness. Sarah touched the simple pearl necklace Tom had given her on their first anniversary. Sometimes you have to walk straight into the lion's den. Just promise you'll leave if things get uncomfortable. Amy helped pin up her mother's hair. I know how these rich people can be. I see them at the hospital, treating the staff like we're invisible. The drive to the marina felt endless. Sarah parked her old car between gleaming luxury vehicles, checking one last time that her investment portfolio printouts were safely tucked into her small clutch bag, just in case. The yacht was massive, strings of lights illuminating its 3 decks. Sarah showed her invitation to the security guard, who looked her up and down before reluctantly letting her pass. "Sarah, you came." James Maxwell greeted her at the gangway, looking distinguished in his suit. "Welcome aboard the Second Chance." "Interesting name for a yacht," Sarah commented. "Everyone deserves one," James smiled, leading her to the main deck. "Come, there are people I'd like you to meet." The deck was filled with Boston's elite, investment bankers, hedge fund managers, real estate moguls. Sarah recognized many of them from cleaning their offices over the years. "James, darling." A tall woman in designer clothes approached. "Who's your charming friend?" "Eleanor Whitmore. Meet Sarah Thompson." Sarah's heart skipped. Eleanor Whitmore, the woman who'd lost millions in the tech sector, crashed 5 years ago. Sarah had overheard the investment advice while cleaning the conference room that day, had wanted to speak up, but knew her place. "Thompson." Eleanor's smile didn't reach her eyes. "What family are you from, dear?" "No family, Miss Whitmore. I work as a cleaner at Maxwell Investments." The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand froze on her champagne glass. "A cleaner?" She turned to James. "How innovative of you to diversify your guest list." Word spread quickly through the party. Sarah could hear the whispers, see the stares. A group of women openly laughed when she passed by. "I heard she cleansed toilets," one stage whispered. "James always had a soft spot for charity cases," another added. Sarah forced herself to stand straight, remembering her father's words about dignity. She made her way to the investment discussion group, where several men were debating market trends. "The Asian markets are the future," one man declared. "My firm is moving all our major investments there." "Actually," Sarah spoke up, her voice steady, "current indicators suggest overvaluation in several key Asian markets. The real opportunity might be in overlooked domestic sectors." The men turned to stare at her. Eleanor Whitmore appeared at the edge of the group, watching intently. "And what would a cleaning lady know about market indicators?" Someone sneered. Sarah pulled out her portfolio printouts. "I know that following the crowd often leads to missed opportunities. While everyone was rushing to tech stocks 5 years ago, some of us saw the warning signs." Eleanor's face went pale. "You," she whispered. "You were there that day, weren't you? Cleaning the conference room when my advisors—" "Yes, Miss Whitmore, I wanted to warn you, but how dare you?" Eleanor's voice rose. "You've been spying on private meetings, using confidential information." The party grew quiet. James stepped forward, but Eleanor was already calling for security. "This woman is a corporate spy. She admits to stealing information during confidential meetings." Sarah felt the room spinning. This was exactly what she'd feared. But then she remembered her father's voice. "When they try to shame you, stand taller." She opened her portfolio, hands steady now. It was time to show them who Sarah Thompson really was. The security guards were approaching, but Sarah knew this moment would either destroy everything she'd built or change her life forever. She took a deep breath and prepared to reveal her secret. "Before you call security," Sarah's voice cut through the tension, "let me show you exactly what I've done with the information I've gathered over the years." She laid her portfolio on the table. Eleanor grabbed it, her eyes scanning the pages rapidly. Her face shifted from anger to disbelief. "This is impossible," Eleanor whispered. "These returns, these investment choices. All legal, all documented, all from my own research and careful observation." Sarah turned to address the crowd. "Yes, I clean your offices. Yes, I've overheard your meetings. But I've never traded on insider information. I simply learned from watching the patterns, the mistakes, the successes." James stepped forward, examining the portfolio. "Sarah, these results are extraordinary. You've outperformed most hedge funds over the past decade. Eleanor slammed the portfolio down. You knew. That day in the conference room, you knew the tech stocks were overvalued. You watched me lose millions. I tried to leave you a note, Sarah admitted, but who would listen to a cleaning lady? The memory of that day came rushing back. Sarah had written a warning, slipped it into Eleanor's coat pocket. Later, she'd found it crumpled in the trash. Miss Whitmore, Sarah continued, your loss that day taught me something important. Money doesn't care about social status. The market doesn't know if you're wearing designer clothes or a cleaner's uniform. More guests gathered around, examining Sarah's investment records. Whispers turned from mockery to amazement. Look at these emerging market plays. She predicted the housing correction. Better returns than my entire team. Then a new voice spoke up. She's been teaching others too. Sarah turned to see Maria, one of her library students, wearing a server's uniform. Everything I know about investing I learned from Mrs. Thompson's free classes. Other servers and staff members stepped forward, sharing their stories. My daughter's in college because of her investment advice. I bought my first house using her strategies. She taught me how to build a retirement fund. Eleanor's face reddened. Your maid, Caroline, she retired last year, said something about smart investments. Yes, Sarah nodded. Caroline was one of my first students. She's doing quite well now. The atmosphere on the yacht shifted. Wealthy guests who had sneered at Sarah earlier now pressed forward with questions about her investment strategy. James raised his glass. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've all been taught a valuable lesson about judging books by their covers. But Eleanor wasn't finished. If you're so successful, why keep cleaning? Why live in that old apartment building? Because money isn't everything, Miss Whitmore. My job gave me insights no fancy degree could provide. It kept me humble, reminded me where I came from. Sarah picked up her portfolio. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an early morning tomorrow. My library students are preparing for their first investments. Wait, James called out. I think we need to talk about your future at Maxwell Investments, perhaps in a different capacity. Before Sarah could respond, Eleanor stepped between them. You can't trust her, James. She's been spying on all of us for years. Who knows what other information she's gathered? The other guests shifted uncomfortably, suddenly reconsidering their own confidential meetings, their carelessly discarded documents. I have a better idea, Eleanor smiled coldly. Why don't we discuss Sarah's interesting investment strategy with the SEC? I'm sure they'd love to know how a cleaning lady acquired such valuable market insights. Sarah felt the floor shift beneath her feet. She'd always known this moment might come, when her two worlds would collide, but she hadn't expected it to become a battle for her freedom. James moved to speak, but Sarah held up her hand. She'd fought too hard, come too far to back down now. Miss Whitmore, she said quietly, before you make that call, there's something else you should know about that day 5 years ago. The party guests leaned in, sensing there was more to this story than anyone had guessed. Eleanor's confident smile wavered slightly as Sarah reached into her clutch for one final document. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the best defense isn't wealth or status, it's the truth you've been saving for exactly the right moment. Sarah pulled out a yellowed envelope, her hands steady. This is a copy of the note I tried to give you, Miss Whitmore. Notice the date, one day before the tech crash. Eleanor snatched the paper, her face paling as she read. This is a warning about the specific companies that failed, with detailed analysis. Analysis any careful observer could have done. Sarah explained. The signs were there: excessive debt, inflated valuations, insider selling. I didn't need inside information. I just needed to pay attention. James took the note, reading it carefully. She's right. This is all public information, just extraordinarily well analyzed. But there's more, Sarah continued. While looking for Miss Whitmore's coat that day, I found something else. She pulled out another document, a copy of an email from your own investment advisor, Miss Whitmore. He knew about the problems, but advised you to keep buying anyway. Eleanor staggered back. Harrison told me. He said it was just market volatility. Because he was selling his own shares while encouraging clients to buy more, Sarah said quietly. I saw the trading records in the trash. The party guests murmured. Harrison Williams was known to many of them, He'd managed several of their portfolios. "That's why I started teaching others," Sarah explained. "Too many people trust their money to those who don't have their best interests at heart." James stepped forward. "Eleanor, if Sarah wanted to harm anyone, she could have exposed this years ago. Instead, she's been quietly helping others protect themselves." Eleanor's face shifted from anger to shock to something else, recognition. "My mother," she whispered. "She mentioned taking investment classes at the library," said her teacher reminded her of her cleaning lady. "Mrs. Whitmore is one of my best students," Sarah smiled. She never mentioned her last name, but she has quite a talent for market analysis. The tension on the yacht suddenly broke. Laughter and conversation resumed, but different now. Guests approached Sarah with genuine questions about her teaching methods, her investment strategies. "I can't believe Harrison," Eleanor said, mostly to herself. "All these years, I blamed myself for those losses." "It's never too late to learn, Miss Whitmore," Sarah offered. "My library class meets every Tuesday and Thursday evening." Before Eleanor could respond, James cleared his throat. "Sarah, I'd like to make you an offer. Not as a cleaner, but as an investment advisor. Your insight could be invaluable to our firm." The party guests fell silent, waiting for her answer. Sarah thought of Amy, of her father, of all her students at the library. "That's very generous, Mr. Maxwell," she began. Suddenly, a commotion near the yacht's entrance interrupted them. A familiar figure pushed through the crowd. Tom Wilson, James's head of security, looking grave. "Mr. Maxwell, we've found something concerning," he said, holding up a file. "About Mrs. Thompson's past." Sarah's heart stopped. There were things even her portfolio couldn't explain, mysteries in her financial rise that she'd hoped would stay buried. Eleanor stepped forward, her face showing newfound interest. "Well, Sarah, what other secrets have you been keeping?" The file in Tom's hand seemed to grow larger, more threatening. Sarah knew that whatever was in there could destroy everything she'd built. James looked at her, concern crossing his face. "Sarah." She took a deep breath. The truth had served her well so far tonight, but some truths were more complicated than others. "Before you open that file," she said, her voice stronger than she felt, "there's something you all need to understand about what really happened 10 years ago." The yacht fell completely silent. Even the waves seemed to hold their breath as Sarah prepared to reveal the final piece of her story, the part she'd never told anyone, not even Amy. Sometimes the biggest risks aren't financial, she thought. Sometimes they're about trusting others with your deepest truths. 10 years ago, Sarah began, my husband Tom didn't just die. He was driven to despair by a predatory investment scheme, a scheme that several people in this room helped create. The yacht's atmosphere turned ice cold. Sarah pointed to the file in Tom's hands. "That file probably shows unusual deposits to my account after Tom's death. Money that couldn't be explained by a cleaner's salary." James stepped closer. "Sarah, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that when Tom died, he left behind evidence. Documents proving how certain investment firms deliberately targeted vulnerable construction workers with fake exclusive investment opportunities. They called it Project Hard Hat." Several guests shifted uncomfortably. Sarah noticed at least 3 men quietly moving toward the exit. Instead of exposing them, I studied their methods, learned their strategies, and then slowly I began using their own tactics against them. But legally, ethically. Tom opened the file, scanning its contents. "She's right, Mr. Maxwell. There are records of substantial gains, all traced back to companies involved in the Hard Hat scandal." Headlines flashed across phones as guests quickly searched, "Construction worker suicide linked to investment fraud." "Hard Hat scandal claims lives. Investigation closed, no charges filed." "My God," Eleanor whispered. "Harrison was involved in that too, wasn't he?" Sarah nodded. "That's why I couldn't warn you directly about him. He would have recognized my name." James ran his hands through his hair. "Sarah, this is complex. These allegations are all documented," she finished. "Every transaction, every player, every victim. I've kept careful records, not for revenge, but for protection." Suddenly, the boat's lights flickered. The party guests looked up, startled. "Storm coming," the captain announced over the intercom. "We need to head back to port." As if on cue, Sarah's phone buzzed. A news alert. "Breaking. Sea launches investigation into Boston investment firms Anonymous whistleblower provides evidence of ongoing fraud. The yacht erupted in chaos. People rushed to make calls, check accounts, contact lawyers. It wasn't me, Sarah said quickly, seeing James's questioning look. But I'm not surprised. The truth has a way of surfacing. Eleanor grabbed Sarah's arm. Those investment classes you teach, you're not just teaching finance, are you? You're teaching people to protect themselves. Knowledge is the best defense, Miss Whitmore, something I learned too late for Tom. The yacht began its turn back to harbor. Rain started falling, sending guests scurrying below deck. But Sarah stayed topside, letting the rain wash over her. Amy called, "Mom, are you okay? There's something on the news." "I'm fine, honey. Everything's gonna change now, but we're gonna be fine." James joined her at the railing. "You could have exposed them years ago. Why wait?" "Because revenge wasn't my goal. I wanted to change the system from within. Show others they could succeed without destroying lives." Thunder rolled across the harbor. Sarah watched Boston's lights flicker in the distance, thinking of her father's words about patience and wisdom. Her phone buzzed again. A message from Mrs. Chen at the library. "Sarah, reporters are here asking questions. What should I tell them?" Another message popped up from one of her students. "Mrs. Thompson, is it true? Were you the one who taught us how to spot investment fraud?" And another, "Channel 5 wants to interview your library students about the hard hat scandal." Sarah turned to James. "I need to protect my students. They had nothing to do with this." But James was already on his phone. "Get me legal, PR, and security. Now, Sarah, whatever happens next, Maxwell Investments stands with you." Eleanor stepped forward. "As do I. Harrison and his cronies need to be stopped." The yacht approached the harbor, city lights blurred by rain. Sarah thought of Amy, of her father, of Tom. She'd wanted to change the system quietly, but maybe some changes needed to be loud. Her phone lit up with another call, a familiar number. The SEC. It was time for Sarah Thompson, the quiet cleaning lady, to step into the light and tell her full story. The storm was just beginning. The next morning's headlines hit like sledgehammers. Cleaning lady or corporate spy. Maxwell Investments under scrutiny. C expands investigation into investment fraud. Sarah sat in her small kitchen, watching her phone explode with notifications. Her library students were texting frantically, many canceling their participation in the classes. "We can't risk being associated with this scandal," one message read. "Sorry, Mrs. Thompson, but I need to protect my family," said another. Amy burst through the door, still in her hospital scrubs. "Mom, why didn't you tell me? I had to find out from the morning news." "Honey, I was trying to protect you." "Protect me? Mom, they're saying you used insider information. They're calling you a fraud. My supervisor just questioned me about our finances." Sarah reached for her daughter's hand, but Amy pulled away. "All these years of cleaning, was it just a cover? Were you really?" Amy's voice cracked. "Were you doing something illegal?" "No, everything I did was legal, ethical. I just saw things others missed. Then why hide it? Why live like we were struggling?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone rang. James Maxwell. "Sarah, we need to talk. The board is meeting in an hour. They're concerned about the publicity." "I'll be there." She changed into her best outfit, not her cleaning uniform this time, and drove to Maxwell Investments. The security guard who'd greeted her daily for years now looked at her with suspicion. The boardroom was packed. James sat at the head of the table looking tired. Eleanor Whitmore sat in the corner, her face unreadable. "Mrs. Thompson," the head of legal began, "your presence has created a significant liability for this firm. Clients are questioning whether their confidential information is secure. Everything I learned was from public. Furthermore," he continued, "your library classes are now under scrutiny. Several attendees have come forward claiming you used your connection to Maxwell Investments to recruit them. That's not true. The board recommends immediate termination of your employment and a public statement distancing Maxwell Investments from your activities." Sarah looked at James, who wouldn't meet her eyes. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said quietly. "The risk to the firm." She stood up, her chair scraping loudly. "For 10 years, I cleaned these offices. I saw how you operated. The real fraud isn't in my investment strategies. It's in how you treat people like my husband, my students, treating them as disposable." Eleanor stood suddenly. "She's right, and you all know it. But the board's decision was final. Sarah was escorted out past her former cleaning colleagues who turned away as she passed. In the parking lot, reporters swarmed her. "Mrs. Thompson, did you steal corporate secrets? Were your library classes a front for insider trading? How long have you been spying on Maxwell Investments?" She drove straight to the library, but found the doors locked. A notice was posted: investment classes temporarily suspended pending investigation. Mrs. Chen met her at the back door, crying, "They're shutting down the program, Sarah. The library can't risk the liability." Back home, Sarah found Amy packing. "I'm staying with a friend for a while," her daughter said. "I need time to process this." "Amy, please. My whole life, I thought we were just struggling working-class people. Now I don't know what's real anymore." After Amy left, Sarah sat alone in her kitchen. Her phone showed missed calls from James, Eleanor, reporters, investigators. Her carefully built world was crumbling. She pulled out her father's Bible, finding his old photo. "What would you do, Dad? How do you fight back when the truth looks like a lie?" A new email popped up from one of her former library students, now a successful small business owner. "Mrs. Thompson, they asked me to speak against you, but I won't. You taught me more than investment strategies. You taught me dignity. Tell me how I can help." Sarah wiped her eyes, straightening her back. Maybe she had hit bottom, but she remembered what her father always said: "The ground is a mighty fine place to push off from." She opened her laptop and began to type. "To whom it may concern, my name is Sarah Thompson, and this is the true story of how a cleaning lady took on Wall Street. The truth had gotten her into this mess. Maybe it could get her out." Sarah's letter went viral overnight. #A Stand with Sarah started trending as hundreds of people shared stories of how her financial literacy classes had changed their lives. "She taught my mother to save for retirement. My kids are in college because of her investment advice. Sarah Thompson showed me how to escape poverty." Eleanor Whitmore sat in her luxury apartment, reading the online testimonials. Her phone rang. Her mother. "Eleanor, dear, we need to talk about Sarah Thompson." "Mom, how do you know?" "Because I'm Margaret in her Tuesday night class, the retired widow who thought she'd lost everything to bad investments. Sarah helped me recover your father's legacy." Eleanor's hand shook. "You're taking her classes. Why didn't you come to me for financial help?" "Pride, perhaps. Or maybe I needed to learn independence. Sarah taught me that." Across town, James Maxwell faced a revolt. Several major clients threatened to leave, not because of Sarah's actions, but because of how the firm handled the situation. "You threw her to the wolves," one client said. "She exposed real fraud, and you punished her for it." Meanwhile, Amy returned home, finding Sarah at her desk surrounded by papers. "Mom." Sarah looked up, eyes tired but determined. "Amy, I'm sorry I kept secrets, but I'm done hiding. I know, I read your letter, and I talked to your students at the hospital." Amy sat down. "The cafeteria workers, the janitors, the nurses, they all told me how you helped them. Why didn't you tell me? After your father died, I promised myself I'd give you security. I thought that meant keeping my activities quiet. But you gave others the same knowledge. Why not your own daughter?" Sarah reached for Amy's hand. This time she didn't pull away. "Because I was afraid you'd see me differently. Afraid I'd fail like your father did." "Mom, Dad's failures weren't yours." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock. Eleanor Whitmore stood at their door. "My mother," Eleanor said without preamble, "says you're the best financial teacher she's ever had. Margaret is a quick learner. Why didn't you tell me she was your student?" "Client confidentiality. Something I learned cleaning offices." Eleanor smiled slightly. "Touche." She paused. "The SEC cleared you of any wrongdoing. Your investment records are spotless." "I know. Then help me." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Help me clean up Wall Street," Eleanor continued. "My firm, my connections, your knowledge, together we could make real changes." Before Sarah could respond, James Maxwell arrived. "The board made a mistake," he said. "We want you back, not as a cleaner, but as head of our new financial education division." Sarah looked between them, the two people who had most represented the world that had rejected her now asking for her help. Her phone buzzed. "Mrs. Chen, library's reopening. Board voted to expand the financial literacy program. When can you start?" Amy squeezed her mother's hand. "What are you thinking?" "Mom." Sarah stood, facing James and Eleanor. I have conditions. They waited. The library program continues, fully funded. My students get real internship opportunities at your firms, and we create a foundation to help victims of financial fraud. Done, James said immediately. Not done, Sarah corrected, because I'm not choosing between you. I'm choosing all of it. The library classes, Maxwell Investments, Eleanor's reform initiatives. Because real change doesn't come from the top down or bottom up. It comes from all directions. Eleanor nodded slowly. Like your investment strategy, diversify for strength. Exactly. Sarah smiled. Now who's ready to really talk about changing the system? Amy watched her mother transform from the quiet cleaning lady to a force for change. Dad would be proud, she whispered. Sarah touched her father's photo on the desk. Changes are coming, Dad. Just like you always said they would. The next morning, Sarah walked into the library. Her students, old and new, rich and poor, waited to learn not just about money, but about dignity, perseverance, and the power of knowledge. The cleaning lady was ready to teach them all. The town hall meeting about the library's future was packed. Sarah sat in the front row, surrounded by her students. James Maxwell and Eleanor Whitmore flanked her, a sight that caused whispers throughout the crowd. The mayor stood at the podium. We're here to discuss the proposed closure and conversion of the Pine Street Library into a commercial tech center. Sarah watched the developers present their sleek plans for glass offices and startup spaces. Their promises of jobs and progress sounded hollow against the reality of what would be lost. When it was time for public comments, Sarah's students lined up at the microphone. Maria, the hotel maid, spoke first. 5 years ago, I was living paycheck to paycheck. Thanks to Mrs. Thompson's classes, I own my home now. A retired veteran followed. Sarah taught us more than money. She taught us dignity. Then Margaret Whitmore, Eleanor's mother, approached the podium. The room hushed. I'm a widow who nearly lost everything to bad investments. In this library, I found not just financial education, but community. You can't put a price on that. The developers shifted uncomfortably. Progress is inevitable, their spokesman argued. Libraries are outdated. Is financial literacy outdated? Sarah finally stood. Is community outdated? She walked to the podium, carrying her father's worn Bible. In this book, my father kept his first American dollar. He came here with nothing but hope and determination. This library was where he learned English, where he studied for his citizenship test. She opened her portfolio. Every success story in here started in this library. Not just financial success, human success. The developers interrupted. Mrs. Thompson, while your work is admirable, the decision is about economics. Then let's talk economics. James Maxwell stood. Maxwell Investments will match any offer for this property. Gasps filled the room. Furthermore, Eleanor added, rising, Whitmore Capital will establish a permanent endowment for financial literacy programs. The mayor leaned forward. You're proposing to save the library? No, Sarah corrected. We're proposing to expand it. A center for financial education, small business support, and community empowerment. The developers huddled together, whispering urgently. The tech center could be integrated into the library, James suggested. Real progress doesn't erase the past, it builds on it. Sarah watched the room shift, hope replacing resignation on familiar faces. But then the lead developer pulled out one last card. We've already signed preliminary contracts. Breaking them would cost millions in penalties. How many millions? A new voice asked. Amy stood up, still in her doctor's scrubs. Because the medical residents at Boston General have started a fund. We want to invest in our community's future. Sarah's eyes welled with tears. Her daughter had learned more than she realized. The mayor called for a vote. Hands rose across the room. Parents, students, workers, professionals, a community united. Motion passed, the mayor announced. The library stays. Cheers erupted. Sarah felt hands patting her back, heard thank yous in multiple languages. James approached with papers. Ready to make it official. The new Sarah Thompson Center for Financial Education. Sarah shook her head. No, the Community Financial Education Center, because this was never about me. Eleanor smiled. Always teaching, aren't you? Always learning, Sarah corrected. My father said America is built on second chances. Today we're all getting one. Outside, reporters gathered, cameras flashing. But Sarah lingered in the library, touching the worn books, breathing in the familiar scent of paper and possibility. Amy found her there. "Mom, everyone's waiting for the press conference." Just remembering, Sarah smiled. This is where it all started, where a cleaning lady dared to dream bigger. And now we help others dream bigger too. They walked out together into the bright autumn sunshine, where a community waited to begin its next chapter. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the biggest victories don't look like victories at all. They look like people standing together, choosing hope over fear, community over profit. They look like second chances. 3 months after the library vote, the Community Financial Education Center was buzzing with activity. The old building had been carefully renovated, preserving its historic charm while adding modern facilities. Sarah stood in her new office, watching students fill the classrooms. Her investment course had expanded into a comprehensive program, with experts from Maxwell Investments and Whitmore Capital volunteering as guest speakers. "Mrs. Thompson," her assistant poked her head in, "the small business owners are here for their mentoring session." In the main hall, 20 aspiring entrepreneurs waited. Many were her former cleaning colleagues, now pursuing their own dreams. "Before we start," Sarah addressed them, "remember what we learned about risk and opportunity. They go hand in hand." The group responded in unison, making her smile. Eleanor Whitmore arrived with her mother Margaret, both now regular volunteers. The transformation in their relationship was remarkable. "We're starting a mother-daughter investment club," Eleanor announced, "open to all community members." Sarah watched them work together, remembering how far they'd come from that night on the yacht. Real change, she'd learned, often started with personal transformation. James Maxwell visited frequently, though today he seemed distracted. "Sarah, could we talk privately?" In her office, he seemed nervous. "These past months working together, I've been thinking." A knock interrupted them. Amy burst in, waving a letter. "Mom, I got the chief resident position." Sarah hugged her daughter, noticing James step back discreetly. The moment passed, but something had shifted. Later that evening, Sarah found a note on her desk. "Dinner tomorrow, James." She smiled, tucking the note away. Some opportunities needed time to develop. The center's success attracted national attention. Financial magazines wrote about the Thompson model of community investment education. Other cities requested guidance on starting similar programs. But Sarah's proudest moment came when her former antagonists from Maxwell Investments enrolled in her advanced class. "We thought we knew everything about money," one admitted. "You've taught us it's about more than profit." The cleaning staff remained special to her. Sarah made sure they received fair wages and investment opportunities at both Maxwell and Whitmore firms. "You didn't forget us," Rita, her old cleaning colleague, said tearfully. "I'll never forget where I came from," Sarah assured her. One evening, while locking up, Sarah found Eleanor waiting. "We're launching a foundation," Eleanor announced, "to help prevent what happened to Tom. Will you help lead it?" Sarah touched her wedding ring. Tom would have liked that. The center became more than a financial hub. It was a community sanctuary. People came for investment advice but found friendship, support, and hope. Amy started a health literacy program, combining medical knowledge with financial planning. "Healthcare and wealth management go hand in hand," she explained. Sarah's father's Bible sat prominently on her desk, its pages now holding new treasures: photos of successful students, thank you notes, news clippings of lives transformed. James finally managed to have that dinner with Sarah. They talked for hours about dreams, second chances, and future possibilities. "You've changed this community," he said. "We all did," she corrected, "together." The next morning, Sarah arrived early at the center. Standing in the quiet hall, she remembered cleaning these floors, dreaming of something bigger. A young janitor passed, pushing his cart. Sarah smiled warmly. "Interested in our investment classes?" He looked surprised, then hopeful. "You really think I could learn?" "I know you can," she said, opening the door to a classroom that once seemed impossible to enter. Sometimes the greatest achievements aren't the ones that make headlines, she thought. They're the quiet moments when someone dares to believe in themselves. And sometimes love grows not in grand gestures, but in shared purposes and mutual respect. Sarah Thompson, former cleaning lady, had finally found her true calling, not just teaching about money, but about dignity, hope, and the power of community. The next chapter was just beginning. 1 year after the library battle, Sarah stood on James Maxwell's yacht, but this time as his co-host. The annual party had been transformed into a celebration of community achievement. Instead of wealthy investors, the deck was filled with graduates of the Financial Education Center. Hotel maids turned business owners, janitors who now managed investment portfolios, and cleaning staff who had become financial advisors. "Look at this," Eleanor said, joining Sarah at the railing. "Who would have thought last year's disaster would lead to this?" Sarah watched Amy chatting with James, both laughing as they shared stories. Her daughter had not only become chief resident, but had also developed a successful financial health program for medical staff. "Mom," Amy called out, "tell them about your big news." Sarah blushed as all eyes turned to her. The diamond ring on her finger caught the evening light. James moved to stand beside her, taking her hand. "Well," Sarah addressed the crowd, "it seems I'm getting a second chance at love too." Cheers erupted across the deck. Eleanor raised her glass. "To Sarah and James." "And to all of you," Sarah added. "Each person here represents what's possible when we believe in each other." Mrs. Chen, now director of the expanded library program, stepped forward. "Sarah, your students have something to show you." A screen lowered on the deck, and a video began playing. One by one, people shared how Sarah had changed their lives. "I own my own cleaning company now. My children are in college. I retired with dignity." The final clip showed Sarah's father's old factory. The current owner spoke, "Thanks to Sarah's program, our workers now have retirement plans, investment opportunities, and financial education." Sarah wiped tears as James squeezed her hand, but there was one more surprise. Eleanor took the microphone. "The Whitmore Maxwell Foundation is launching a national initiative. The Sarah Thompson Financial Literacy Program will open centers across the country." More cheers, more tears. Sarah looked around at faces that had become family. Eleanor and her mother Margaret, her former cleaning colleagues, her students, and James. Amy joined them, hugging her mother. "Dad would be so proud," she whispered. Sarah touched her father's Bible, which she'd brought along. Inside, next to his old dollar bill, she'd added new treasures. A photo of the library victory, her engagement announcement, and a letter from a young cleaning lady who just started classes. "Your father was right," James said softly. "The American dream isn't just about making money. It's about lifting others as you rise," Sarah finished. As the sun set over Boston Harbor, Sarah thought about her journey, from cleaning offices to changing lives. Her father's words echoed, "Success isn't what you have, it's what you share." The yacht's lights twinkled against the darkening sky. Music played, people danced, and stories of transformation filled the air. Tomorrow she would return to teaching, to building dreams to her ever-growing community family. James raised his glass. "To second chances." "To community," Eleanor added. "To love," Amy smiled. Sarah looked at them all, her past, present, and future united on this deck. "To dreams," she said, "and to those brave enough to chase them." Later, as the party wound down, Sarah stood alone at the railing. She remembered that first night, terrified and alone. Now she was engaged to James, partners with Eleanor, proud of Amy, and surrounded by a community of achievers. A young cleaning lady approached her. "Mrs. Thompson, I just started at Maxwell Investments. I was wondering." Sarah smiled warmly. "Investment classes are Tuesday and Thursday evenings. First lesson is free." The girl's eyes lit up with hope. The same hope Sarah had seen in her own eyes years ago. Some treasures, she realized, weren't kept in banks or portfolios. They lived in the moments when one person helped another believe in themselves. That was the real American dream. Not just success, but significance. Not just wealth, but worth. And as Sarah looked out over the harbor, her father's Bible close to her heart and her future bright before her, she knew that the greatest riches were the ones you gave away. The cleaning lady had become a teacher, the outsider had become a leader, and dreams had become reality. But more importantly, she had learned that true wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in lives changed and hopes restored. That was a fortune worth more than all the money in the world. The end. Dear friends, if this story touched your heart and reminded you that it's never too late to chase your dreams, please hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. What would you do with a second chance? How has someone's belief in you changed your life? Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that prove the American dream is alive in every heart brave enough to believe. Remember, your past is just the first chapter. You hold the pen to write the rest of your story.